Welcome to Unit 9, Civil War and Reconstruction, Lesson 5, Differences between the North and the South. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. You may be good at math and sports, but not so great at science and card games. The trick is figuring out how to use what you've got to the best advantage. Strengths and weaknesses. During the Civil War, both the North and the South had strengths and weaknesses. The North had a much larger population than the South, and Union states were home to large cities, which were centers of business and industry. More than 100,000 factories were located in Union states, about 5 times the industrial capacity of the agrarian South. The Union also boasted a stronger military infrastructure. It had a navy and many more ships than the South. West Point, the best military academy in the country to train leaders in the midst of war, was in the North. Many Northern officers had trained there. However, the South also had talented graduates of West Point leading its soldiers. Robert E. Lee graduated from the military academy, and so did Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president. With its smaller numbers, the South fought the war largely on the defensive. Simply trying to defend itself seemed to be the best way to win the war, at least initially. As a result, most of the fighting took place in Confederate states, but this gave the Confederate forces a geographic advantage. They were fighting in areas they knew well, while the Union Army found itself on unfamiliar ground. The South also used more offensive tactics to wear down the North. Confederate leaders encouraged private ship owners to intercept and capture Northern merchant ships and their cargo in the Atlantic. And some Southern generals planned to concentrate their forces and exert pressure on the northern capital of Washington, D.C., which bordered Southern states. Making a game plan. One of the renowned generals who led the Union, Winfield Scott, a hero of the Mexican-American War and the War of 1812, also had a plan. When the Civil War began, Scott was the commander-in-chief of the United States Army. In early 1861, he formulated a strategy he hoped would put an end to the war. His plan called for blocking Confederate ports along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts with Union warships. The North hoped to cripple the Confederate war effort and economy by preventing the delivery of weapons and halting cotton exports. Scott also proposed sending troops to gain control of the Mississippi River and capture major cities and river ports, creating divisions in the South. Scott's massive blockade was risky. No blockade of this size had ever been tried before. There were more than 3,000 miles of coastline to block with fewer than 40 ships. Scott's idea was nicknamed the Anaconda Plan, after a type of snake that strangles its prey. Within a week after the loss of Fort Sumter, Lincoln ordered the blockade to be carried out, and it was somewhat successful. However, many Northern leaders ridiculed the plan. They wanted to take action and fight. To counter the plan, the South tried to create a cotton shortage on the European market. The Confederacy hoped the shortage would force Great Britain and France, 2 major cotton consumers, to join the Confederate cause and to help break up the Union blockade. The attempt backfired when both countries bought cotton from Egypt and India instead. Meanwhile, the Confederate Army engaged in terrible battles on the ground that would claim many lives and eventually give the South greater hope. Scott's Great Snake. The Anaconda Plan was meant to strangle the South by cutting off all trade among Southern states and allowing the Union to take control of the Mississippi River. Scott believed his plan would put an early end to the war and limit the number of casualties. Scott proposed sending a large naval force down the Mississippi River that would capture forts and towns along the banks. Union ships patrolled the coastal border to prevent deliveries of weapons and supplies to Southern states. Scott's plan was never fully implemented, but a naval blockade was maintained throughout the war. The blockade succeeded in cutting off the South's resources and probably did shorten the war. But not even Scott knew how the war would develop. He guessed it would go on for 2 years, not 4. Geographic advantages. Geography is critically important in any war. Mountains and rivers can serve as natural defenses, helping an army to defend itself from invaders. Hills can provide a visual advantage for soldiers who are watching for enemy troops. Trees felled in a forest can slow down an army as it tries to pass through. In the Civil War, the Union and the Confederacy had other types of geographic advantages. You've learned that the Union had a greater population spread across a wide geographic area, which helped boost the size of its army. It also had many industrial centers. As you know too, the Confederacy had the advantage of fighting the war on familiar terrain. And the South grew abundant in cotton, which could be sold to help cover Confederate war expenses. Population. In 1860, the North had a population of about 18.5 million people, of which about 3.8 million free men were of military age. In contrast, the South had about 5.5 million free persons and 3.5 million enslaved people. Only 1.1 million free men were of military age, and 80% of these went to war. This percentage reflects the South's dedication to the cause for independence, since Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy relied on the voluntary cooperation of state governments for troops. Additionally, 19 of the largest cities in the United States were part of the Union. Because the South was an agricultural society with few industrial cities to attract large populations, the Confederacy had only 2, New Orleans and Charleston. Geographic advantages. Rail transportation. The Union had more than twice as many miles of railroad lines as the Confederacy. In the South, most railroads went from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia to Charleston, carrying cotton for exporting. The Civil War was one of the first wars in which railroads played a critical role. The Union and the Confederacy both used railroads to ship equipment, weapons, and troops. Sometimes, officers even sent spies on the trains to learn about the opponent's troop movements. However, the Confederacy began the war at a disadvantage. Their railroads were in bad shape, and repairs often had to wait. Many railroad workers had quit to fight the war. Geographic advantages. Industry. Manufacturing, especially of iron and steel, was critically important to both the Union and the Confederacy during the Civil War. As you've learned, the majority of the factories were in the North, but the Confederacy did have some of Virginia and other states. The largest Confederate iron works was in Richmond, Virginia. Confederate officers fought to protect their factories because they were so important in the South. Because the Union did more manufacturing, it was able to produce more of the rifles, cannons, railroad tracks, locomotives, and other materials its army needed for war. That was a definite advantage. Geographic advantages. Agriculture. Cotton was king in the South. The region devoted the majority of its economic and technological energy to this cash crop. As a result, the South supplied most of the world's cotton, producing 77% of the cotton used by Great Britain, the largest maker of textiles in the world. Cotton was critical to the Confederacy's ability to raise the huge amounts of money needed to fight a war. In addition to Great Britain, the South exported cotton to France and other European countries and used the profits to buy weapons and equipment and to fund the Confederate government. Even textile mills in the North bought cotton from the South. The Confederacy also borrowed against the promise of future cotton crops to pay for its war efforts. Just a quick review before we end this video. Both the Union and the Confederacy had advantages and disadvantages, and each came up with strategies for winning the war. At the start of the Civil War, the Union and Confederacy each had important geographic advantages. That's all for today's video.